Ross Kemp reprised his role as the beloved character last month as Nigel Bates, Paul Bradley. Dementia's storyline reached its emotional end, and since then we've seen Grant trying and failing to bond with Mark. Grant has gone to all sorts of lengths to try and get his estranged son on side, but in trying to help him with his problems with gangland boss Russell, his actions ultimately ended up getting Mark kidnapped and held to ransom. Meanwhile, Mark has also been doing all sorts of dodgy dealings with Lauren Branning, Jacqueline Jassa, selling on stolen vehicles at the car lot to raise cash. This week, we also saw Mark contemplate robbing the car lot safe in an attempt to pay off his debts to Russell, and while he stopped short of thieving, he dropped his keys to number 55, which upon finding them piqued Max Branning's, Jake Wood's, suspicions. Next week, Max keeps a close eye on Lauren when she takes delivery of another car, and later tries the keys he found in the door of number 55, sharing his suspicions with Cindy Beale, Michelle Collins. Mitchell's siblings Grant, Sam Kim Metcalf, and Phil Steve McFadden confront Max on the doorstep and dismiss his claims. But Max later goes public with his suspicions about Mark at the unveiling of the new car lot name, believing he has definitive proof of what he's been up to. To everyone's surprise, Grant steps forward and claims responsibility in order to protect his Mark. Will it finally help build bridges between father and son? Either way, Grant's time on the square is running out, with Sam suggesting she and Grant head back to Portugal together. That plan then gathers pace when Lauren tips off the Mitchells that Max has called the police. Will Grant make a clean getaway, or is he destined to do time for Mark's crimes? EastEnders takes a dramatic turn as Grant Mitchell returns to Walford for what was meant to be a short, explosive stint, but it quickly spirals into something far more tragic, forcing him into a final decision that changes everything. The Square had never truly forgiven Grant Mitchell. Even after all these years away, his name still carried weight, like a storm cloud that refused to drift from Walford's skyline. People remembered the shouting, the broken doors, the grudges that never quite died. And yet, when he stepped back into Albert Square that cold evening, there was something different in his eyes. Tiredness. Not the kind that sleep could fix, but the kind that comes from a lifetime of running from consequences. Phil Mitchell was the first to see him. "You've got some nerve showing your face here," Phil muttered outside the Queen Vic, arms folded like iron bars. Grant didn't even flinch. "Not here for trouble." Phil let out a dry laugh. "That's what you always say. Then trouble follows you home." But Grant wasn't looking for a fight. Not this time. He was looking for answers, about a debt that had followed him back from his past, one he thought he'd buried forever. And now it was in Walford. It started with whispers. A man from Grant's old life had surfaced. A dangerous connection from overseas, tied to money laundering, old dodgy deals, and something far worse than either Mitchell brother wanted to admit. Grant had tried to walk away from it years ago, disappearing abroad, cutting ties, building a fragile new life. But you don't walk away from men like that. They don't forget. And now they had come to Walford. At first, Grant tried to handle it alone. He always did. Pride was stitched into his DNA. He met the contact in silence behind the arches, rain dripping from rusted metal beams. "You took something that wasn't yours," the man said. "I left that life," Grant replied. "That life didn't leave you." The warning was clear. Repay the debt, or people he cared about would pay instead. And for the first time in years, Grant felt fear that wasn't for himself. Sharon was the first innocent name mentioned. Then Phil. Then Tiffany. That's when everything changed. Grant stopped trying to run. He went back to Phil that night. "I need your help," Grant admitted, the words tasting foreign in his mouth. Phil stared at him for a long moment, as if waiting for the punchline. "Say that again?" "There's a job," Grant said quietly. "One last thing. After that they're gone." Phil shook his head. "There's always one last thing with you." But this time it wasn't greed or pride driving Grant. It was protection. And Phil saw it reluctantly. That didn't mean he trusted it. The plan was simple, the kind that never stays simple. A handover. Money exchanged for silence. A final clean break. But Walford never allowed clean breaks. The night of the deal, the square felt unusually still, like even the wind was holding its breath. Grant stood near the docks watching headlights cut through the fog. Phil was nearby, against his better judgment. "So this is it?" Phil asked. "This is it," Grant confirmed. But deep down, neither of them believed it. The men arrived faster than expected. 3 cars. Too many for a negotiation. The leader stepped out first, smiling like he already owned the outcome. "You brought company," he said, noticing Phil. "I brought insurance," Grant replied. That was the moment everything snapped. The deal collapsed into chaos. Shouting, movement, the sudden flash of metal. A gun appeared. Someone screamed. Phil lunged. Grant followed. And then the shot rang out. For a second, everything froze. Phil was on the ground. Grant didn't even think. He pushed Phil behind a stack of crates as another shot cracked through the air. Glass shattered somewhere behind them. Footsteps scattered. "Stay down," Grant shouted. But Phil was bleeding. Badly. And Grant knew instantly. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't something you walk away from. The irony wasn't lost on him. All the years of fighting each other and now this. "Don't you dare die on me," Grant muttered, pressing his hand against the wound. Phil let out a strained laugh. "Bossy as ever, you haven't changed." Grant swallowed hard. "Yeah, well, I was hoping you had." But there was no time for sentiment. The attackers were regrouping. More coming. And Grant made a choice in that moment, not tactical, not smart, but instinctive. He lifted Phil's arm over his shoulder. "You're not staying here." "You're mad," Phil groaned. "Probably." And then Grant did something he had spent his whole life avoiding. He ran. Through alleys, behind bins, across wet pavement that reflected flashing lights like broken memories. Grant carried his brother through the dark streets of Walford. Sirens began to wail in the distance, but they were too far away. Too late. Phil's weight grew heavier with every step. "Why are you doing this?" Phil whispered. Grant didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was simple and he hated it. "Because you're my brother," he finally said. They reached a back entrance near the market. But it was already surrounded. The men had anticipated it. And now there was no escape. Grant lowered Phil carefully behind a wall and stepped forward alone. "No," Phil rasped. "Don't." "Stay down," Grant said again, softer this time. And then he walked into the open. The confrontation was silent at first. Rain began to fall again, washing the square in silver light. The leader stepped forward. "This ends one way," he said. Grant nodded. "Yeah, it does." But it wasn't fear in his voice. It was acceptance. Because Grant Mitchell had finally realized something he had avoided his entire life. You can't outfight your past. But you can choose what it costs. What happened next was never shown clearly to Walford. Only fragments. A struggle. A final shout. A flash of movement in the rain. And then silence. By the time the police arrived, the square was empty. Phil was found alive, barely. The men were gone. But Grant Mitchell was not. In the days that followed, rumors spread quickly. Some said he escaped. Some said he finally ran too far. But those who knew him best, Phil, Sharon, even the square itself, understood something different. Grant hadn't run. Not this time. He had stayed. And in staying, he had made the only sacrifice he ever truly could. Walford moved on as it always does. But in quiet moments, when the rain hit the pavement just right and the pub lights flickered against the dark, it almost felt like he was still there. Watching. Guarding. Haunted. But finally free. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to EastEnders Spoilers Official.